안녕하십니까. Thank you very much for giving me the opportunity to talk about the emergent policy agenda in Japan, which is a nuclear power plant siting issue. And this is my third time visiting EAI, and I have always enjoyed the opportunity to exchange ideas at this prestigious research institute. And let me jump into my work. Before jumping into this, let me introduce my academic background a little bit. I started my research career studying Japan's foreign aid policy and continued on to study pork barrel politics in Japan. The underlying idea is that both foreign aid and pork barrel politics have something in common in the sense that the donor or the central governments are providing thinly sliced benefits to geographically segmented recipients. In the case of foreign aid, they are the foreign aid recipient countries. In the case of domestic pork barrel politics, they are electoral districts. What I'm talking about today, nuclear facility siting issue, is basically the negative or the opposite side of redistributive politics. In the case of foreign aid or pork barrel politics, politicians or the aid agency is providing positive economic benefits to geographically segmented areas or districts or countries. But in the case of nuclear facility siting, potentially negative impact is distributed to geographically segmented areas. And in order to compensate for the perceived negative economic cost or risk of accidents, the government need to provide some sort of compensation schemes. But because the risk of an accident, because of the damage to properties, may not be matched up pretty well with the provided compensation, there may be some sort of political cacophonies or conflicting interests. That's basically the underlying theme of my ongoing research project. Last year, I talked about the issue of military-based relocation from Okinawa to Guam, but the underlying structure of the problem is basically the same as this nuclear power plant siting issue. This is a joint work with a PhD student in Uppsala University, Michihito Ando, and we have been investigating this issue since the Fukushima accident in March. And I think I need to apologize for the roughness of my current form of the manuscript. It will take another 2 months or 3 months until this paper become full-fledged manuscript. And we are still in the process of analyzing the data. So let me start with the motivation and then analyze the siting decisions. And after that, I will try to assess the impact of atomic power plant, nuclear power plant siting on local political economy. And the analysis is basically based on municipality level observations of elections as well as local government finance. So this is the current location of nuclear reactors in Japan. There are as many as 55 nuclear reactors, including the ones in Fukushima Daiichi. All of the Fukushima Daiichi reactors will be abolished after the accidents are cleaned up. But as we draw circles of equal distances, in this case, I think the radius is something like 80 miles. But as you draw circles of the same size, you can cover most of the Japanese archipelago, which means that once most of the Japanese archipelago is now covered with risk of an accident, although the electronic companies are trying to contain the possibility of an accident, but the presence of nuclear power plants is almost ubiquitous in that country. That said, this is the occurrences of earthquakes, epicenters of earthquakes in the world between year 1963 and 1998. And it is said that about 10% of all the earthquakes that happen in the world happen around the Japanese archipelago. Given this sort of natural environmental parameters, it might not be a good idea to locate as many nuclear reactors in Japan, even considering the shortage of energy supply. Perhaps Japan might need to look for alternative sources of energy because of the aftermath of the Fukushima Daiichi accident anyway. So this is an area view of Fukushima Daiichi, and it is fairly obvious that the accident motivated us to study this issue of nuclear power plant siting. And after the accident, what shocked me most was the absence of serious political economy analysis of the incentive structures that surrounded the power generating companies. One of the root causes of this accident is obviously the seismological shock as well as the impact of tsunami. But even before the accident, experts were cautioning the danger of Fukushima Daiichi plant. But the TEPCO company did almost nothing to improve the situation, remove the risk. In that sense, one of the important causes of the accidents was actually corruption and regulatory failure. And what shocked me most was that political scientists and economists remained fairly silent about this issue, much less to say serious data analysis of local government finance and so on. That's one of the reasons why I jumped into this issue. So this is aftermath of the accident, and the map basically indicates the spread of nuclear fallouts and the density of radiation in this. The subsidization scheme for the local government is basically intended to subsidize nearby municipalities surrounding the nuclear reactors. But as far as we can see from this map, municipalities that are located relatively far away from the reactors were also damaged by the nuclear fallout. And it appears that ex-ante compensation scheme didn't work well with this sort of distribution of risk. And it's fairly difficult to tell in advance who will suffer from the fallouts of the nuclear accident. And in that sense, there may be some sort of technological difficulties in devising efficient and effective compensation or insurance scheme in advance. So the motivation is, once again, the accident since March 11, and you know that the accidents have not been fixed, and still there is ongoing crisis. But aside from that, theoretically speaking, what we are observing is the eruption and realization of NIMBY politics. NIMBY politics, NIMBY is an abbreviation of not in my backyard, as you already know, and it's a distribution of negative economic benefits. But the striking feature of NIMBY politics is that whereas the negative impact of those facilities may be negative public goods, which do not exclude selected group of residents, the negative impact may be pervasive no matter what kind of political attitude or what kind of asset they may have. The kind of compensation schemes can be carried out by means of delivery of private goods. That sort of asymmetry is one thing that I am trying to explore using data. And before going into the impact of the nuclear facilities, let me first investigate where nuclear facilities are located. The structure of NIMBY politics is basically that the facility that might have negative externality effect had some sort of beneficial effect to other communities. In the case of nuclear power plants, negative externality is somehow contained in nearby municipalities, whereas the benefit accrues in distant areas. In the case of Fukushima nuclear power plants, the negative impact on the local economy, even without accident, happens in surrounding communities. And the benefit is consumed by electricity consumers, power consumers in Tokyo in this particular case. So the hypothesis is that these NIMBY facilities are located in areas where negative externality is minimized and positive externality is maximized. And my proxy variable in this particular case is that population within 30 kilometers, which happen to be the size of the immediate evacuation zone after the Fukushima Daiichi accident, may be small, whereas population size of the consuming area will be large. So I calculated the population surrounding a particular municipality for the period between 1960 and year 2003. And I calculated this surrounding population size for 3,300 municipalities in Japan. It took my PC a while, about 6 hours to finish the calculation. But and in addition to that, because the central government is forcing economic damage, for instance, asset value decline to the resident, there needs to be some sort of political coordination mechanism. And only senior LDP politicians would have been able to do that. So LDP vote shares would be higher in those municipalities that ended up housing nuclear facilities. And I applied survival analytic methods for this set of data. By the way, one of the existing studies done by Dan Aldrich indicates that nuclear facilities tended to be located in tended to avoid areas where communist supporters were abundant. And he used communist supporters as a proxy variable of the strength of civil society. But I would say that he would not be capturing that NIMBY politics decision-making process. So this is the coefficient I got. And because I am using survival analytic method, and because these coefficients for the hazard rate, coefficient larger than 1 basically means positive impact on the hazard rate, and coefficient smaller than 1 indicates negative impact in regression analysis with ordinary least squares. Similar to negative coefficients in those OLS estimation. So basically, what I got as a significant result is that when I included all municipalities in Japan, again, population within 30-kilometer radius is negatively correlated, whereas population size within 300 kilometers radius was positively correlated. And it appears that the LDP's vote share as well as the LDP members' seniority was also positively correlated with the timing of, as well as the decision to locate nuclear power plants in municipalities. And one important feature of the Japanese nuclear power plant is that all of the nuclear power plant is adjacent to the sea, so that they can collect cooling water from the ocean. And when I segmented the sample to include only the municipalities that are directly adjacent to the sea, the results I got remained mostly the same, although the size of the coefficient as well as the significance of the coefficient changed. Basically, the conclusion is that the population size surrounding the nuclear power plant is small. The population size of the municipalities immediately surrounding the nuclear power plant is small, whereas population in larger radius is large. And nuclear power plant also required some sort of coordination by the senior LDP members. And if you take a look at the individual power plants, there are senior LDP politicians that played an important coordination role. For instance, if you take a look at power plants in Fukushima, it's senior members, Mr. Ito Masayoshi and so on. If you take a look at municipalities in Niigata, it was Prime Minister Tanaka. If you take a look at the one in Shimane, it was Mr. Sakurauchi, who served as Speaker of the House, who played an important role in coordinating the siting decisions of those nuclear power plants. So this is basically the summary. Then what sort of impact do those nuclear power plants have on local political economy? Theoretically, we can think about the whole variety of negative impact. People who are afraid of the danger of radiation might migrate out of the municipality. Consumers who are afraid of contamination of radioactive substances may no longer buy agricultural products from those municipalities. Then the asset values may decline. The values of the farm products may decline. But on the other hand, there are positive economic impact in the sense that electricity companies will hire a lot more local residents who are seeking employment opportunities. But whenever you try to assess the impact of nuclear power plants, there are several methodological difficulties. One is obviously the small number of cases. There are only 30-some municipalities that accommodated the nuclear power plant in Japan. And carrying out simple statistical methods suffer from the small number of cases. Matching estimation, regression discontinuity, and those sorts of methods are difficult to implement simply because of the shortage of supply in terms of the number of cases. Another obvious methodological difficulty is endogeneity. These locations are carefully selected by the LDP government over a long run, and wherever selected has some sort of strategic values for the political party. So using ordinary least squares under the current situation would lead us to generate some sort of endogeneity bias in the estimated coefficient. So in order to cope with that, we ended up applying what is called synthetic control methods. Synthetic control, I will provide some explanations about synthetic control, but this is formula for local government finance, and the horizontal axis of this picture is basically the years, the number of years since the start of the project, and year 0 means the start of environmental assessment. And construction starts in year 3. And in this simulation sample, the 10th year is the start of the operation. And the government provides funds to the municipal government that accommodated the nuclear power plants in this manner. So they provide small amount of research money in the environmental assessment stage. And as the construction starts, the municipal government start to collect decent amount of initial promotion grant as well as asset property taxes. And as the operation starts, the asset value skyrockets, and the government starts to collect large amount of asset values. But the interesting part of the incentive scheme is that asset value declines simply because of depreciation of the nuclear power plant itself. What happens after several years is that local government, which is addicted to the provision of money, wants to get another reactor so that they can have access to another sources of property taxes. That way, the Japanese local government, well, one of the reasons why we see concentration of a large number of nuclear facilities in a small number of municipalities, that municipal governments were equipped with the incentive to add nuclear reactors one after another because of the way the financial incentives were structured. And the synthetic control is a popular statistical analytic method, especially for students who do small and comparative case studies. And in this type of methodology, we have one treated unit in the set of data sets, and we statistically devise the counterfactual by synthetically calculating weighted average of the observations which did not receive the treatment. We try to make the control unit synthetically compiled control unit and the treated unit as similar as possible, without the point that one of the units received the treatment, whereas the control unit didn't receive the treatment. And we statistically compare the control unit by calculating the weighting average by maximizing the similarity of the outcome variable before the treatment happened. And we picked 6 nuclear power plants, atomic power plants that started operation around 1980. And the treatment unit is the municipality with the power plants. And the control units were selected from municipalities in the same prefecture. And we take a look at income per capita, local government spending, as well as the LDP's votes. Here's what happened with Tomioka town, where Fukushima Daini nuclear reactors are located. And 1980 is the timing of the treatment. And it appears that the income level of the treated unit, I mean Tomioka town, and the synthetic control unit is fairly similar before the treatment. And after the treatment, there was some sort of more rapid rise of income in Tomioka town, whereas in the synthetic control, the income level was about 10% lower in most of the years. But toward 1990, their income levels actually converged, surprisingly. But after several years, the income levels for the treated unit rose much faster than the control unit. And estimated size of the difference was mostly something like $1,000 US for those years with gaps. But in some years, the income levels were the same. We also carried out what is called placebo test. We repeated the same analysis for municipalities as if they got the treatment. And those dashed lines indicates the estimates for the municipalities that actually belong to the control unit. And wherever we find positive values for the treated unit shows that we can place some trust in the statistical analysis. And it appears that the result we got with this picture is not placebo effect. It appears that the effect is real, but we see some wild jumps in the controlled municipalities that belong to the control unit, and we might need to be a little bit more careful about what kind of oscillation was generating the jumps in the income level of some of the municipalities. Sometimes construction of highways drive up municipal income levels. Construction of soccer stadium or shopping centers provides some sort of wild oscillation. And I think we need to be a little bit more careful about those incidents. But on average, it appears that the nuclear power plants provided some positive economic impact in terms of income as far as this municipality is concerned. This is one of the villages in Niigata Prefecture. In this case, it was difficult for us to simulate the pre-treatment value. Ideally, the values for the treated unit and the control unit before the treatment should resemble each other for the purpose of statistical analysis. But in this case, the treated unit, the income for the treated unit diverged from the control groups much earlier than the treatment. There are several reasons why this happened. Construction of bullet train tracks was happening as early as the 1970s, and there was some sort of asset price hikes that are related to the construction of highways and bullet trains, which are negative externality INVI facilities, actually. And in addition to that, the construction of nuclear power plants in nearby municipalities starting in the early 1970s might have contaminated the analysis. So the analysis is not so straightforward in this case. In this placebo analysis, value for the treated unit almost always exceeds the value for municipalities that belong to the control group. So anyway, this village performed much better than the villages and towns in the control units. This is Onagawa town in Miyagi Prefecture, which nearly avoided catastrophic accidents after the March earthquake. In this case, the income level rose slightly after the construction of the nuclear reactors, but after a while, their income level remained almost the same with the control unit, the municipalities in the control unit. There are several possibilities in this particular case. Fishing industry was flourishing before the construction of nuclear power plants in this particular municipality. But for the time being, the municipal income level rose as a result of asset income and the whole variety of subsidy packages provided to this particular municipality. But the fishing industry and other sort of manufacturing industry migrated out of the municipality, there might have been some sort of convergence going on with the control group and the treated unit. The placebo analysis also suggests some sort of similarity between the placebo units and the treated units. And it appears that the effect of the nuclear power plant is heterogeneous across municipalities that accepted the nuclear power plant. Here's a schematic picture of the impact of nuclear power plants on local government finance. And the Japanese government carried out the subsidization of municipalities as they had promised in this institutional model case might suggest. And it appears that there was a clear impact on local tax revenue as well as the local tax expenditure. The municipal government finance became much better even without local, fiscal transfer from the central government to the local government. Construction spending by the municipal government also increased a lot. And as a result of municipal government accepting nuclear power plants, what happened in those towns and villages was gorgeous swimming pool and baseball stadium, in addition to concert halls and libraries. Construction of these facilities after accepting those nuclear power plants. But the problem was that as they located those facilities, they also suffered from skyrocketing running costs of those facilities. And as the income taxes, property taxes from the nuclear facilities declined as the depreciation of the nuclear reactors happened, they suffered shortage of tax incomes, tax revenues. And that also drove municipal government to construct additional nuclear facilities. This is the impact on LDP's vote share, and we were surprised to see this pattern of the data. Lack of the pattern. In some municipalities, construction of nuclear power plants actually reduced the LDP's vote-getting performance. In some municipalities, the vote-getting capability of the treated unit was much higher already, even before the start of the construction. And the performance didn't change much before and after the election. In Fukushima Daini nuclear reactor, Futaba town, the LDP's vote-getting capability was higher before the treatment, but after the treatment, its vote-getting capability converged to the control unit. So we do not observe a systematic pattern in the data. So what we see is that clear impact on local government finance. And out of increased tax revenue, municipal government spent a lot on the construction project, and there was inflow of huge construction budget into the local communities. And we also observed moderate impact on residents' income, but I think we need to investigate more carefully about what sort of data what sort of patterns were in other municipalities that accepted the nuclear power plants. And as far as the vote share of the LDP is concerned, we see unclear pattern, and we have not made a definitive conclusion about this variable. And perhaps this unclear pattern in the voting behavior is derived simply because the central government as well as the electricity company didn't care much about who serves in the lower house. The vote share I showed is basically the LDP's lower house vote share, and it doesn't tell you anything about local politics. And as long as the local government elects mayor that supports the nuclear facility, the power generating company does not have a strong reason to be concerned about who is in there. So the local, the lower house vote share within the municipality did not have a strong impact on national politics anyway. And as far as major parties support nuclear power plants anyway, the electricity generating company didn't have a strong reason to make a political intervention into the process. And my preliminary conclusion at this stage is that nuclear power plant siting decision is a typical NIMBY politics example. And the government has an incentive to minimize the damage of negative externality effect, whereas they also try to maximize positive impact. And the damage to the selected few, as well as the benefit to the spread many, was the structure of the NIMBY politics, and the location decision happened as expected by the structure of NIMBY politics. In Japan, several years ago, there was a movie titled Tokyo Genpatsu, which means that nuclear power plants in Tokyo. Well, if the NIMBY politics doesn't operate as NIMBY politics, perhaps that might have been more efficient in terms of transmission of electricity. But because the NIMBY politics is NIMBY politics, the location decision was made in accordance with that principle. And we also observed some weak effects on residents' income. And the size of the impact on the income is mostly commensurate with the amount of budget spent in those municipalities. It's about 10 million US dollars per municipality, and that's roughly about the amount of money each of the power generating companies spend in the municipality. It's also commensurate with the central government budget per municipality. And if we divide the amount of money by the number of residents, it's basically that basically explains the income gap between the treated municipality and the synthetic control municipality. So this is basically the conclusion I got, and I'd like to discuss the implications with you. Thank you very much.